Well, good afternoon, everybody. Last week's vote, or I should say it's the week before last week's vote, not to shut the government down, has seemed to create something of a civil war among the Democrats. And as they're sort of hashing that out, figuring out their path forward, we're going to continue to stay focused on our agenda. And this week is getting the president's people into place, continuing to process nominations so that the president has his team ready to go to work. We'll continue working that. We're going to be working on unwinding a lot of the Biden administration's burdensome regulations through the Congressional Review Act process, and obviously we're going to stay very focused on budget reconciliation, which is part of the president and our agenda as we head forward. And we had a good conversation about that at our lunch just now, and we're going to continue to be talking about this with our members and having the end goal in mind. And that end goal is coming up with a budget reconciliation bill in the end that extends the existing tax policy, which if isn't done will lead to a $4.5 trillion tax increase at the end of this year, unlocking and restoring America's energy dominance, rebuilding our military, and making sure that our border is secure. Those are the issues that we believe need to be addressed in the budget reconciliation bill, and that's consistent with the president's agenda and with what the American people voted for in November. So that's the work at hand right now, and obviously as we move forward, we'll be working closely with our counterparts in the House of Representatives and with the president and his team in putting this together. But it draws a stark contrast with what the Democrats want to see, and that clearly is a $4.5 trillion tax increase at the end of the year, a lot more government spending, and obviously an open border, which is what we've had for the last 4 years. So we think that the work we're doing is going to draw a clear contrast between us and the Democrats and what the American people, we believe, voted for in November. So, questions?
Leader Thune, with this text chain, there was some indication that these officials didn't think much of the Europeans in this. Doesn't that problem with this antipathy for the Europeans underscore issues for this administration dealing with our allies?
Well, I mean, I think obviously we're getting to the bottom of what that whole text chain entailed, and I think obviously people are asking questions and they deserve answers. But I think that the United States right now is the recognized world leader, and I think the president's moves on the world stage, including the initiative against the Houthis in Yemen, demonstrates that this is a new administration. There's a new sheriff in town, and at some point, I think the Europeans and all the other countries around the world, whether they like it or not, realize that. And I think they have to understand that if they want to have the U.S.'s support, they've got to do their fair share as well, and I think that's the message the president has delivered to our European allies, and some of them don't like it. But they've been riding on the U.S. for way too long, and it's time for them to step up and do more.
Doesn't that publicly, though, harm our relationship with them?
Well, any text change that are exchanged privately, I think you have to put that into context for what it is. I think you have to look at what the president says and what the people around him are saying on these issues of foreign policy and national security, and not text messages that were obviously probably inappropriate.
On reconciliation, you have a goal of maybe more than $1 trillion in cuts. You want to extend the Trump tax cuts. Democrats have said that you can't do that without impacting entitlement programs. Can you guarantee at this stage of the negotiations that no one's Social Security benefits will be impacted at the end of this?
Well, Social Security is not eligible for consideration under reconciliation, so that doesn't get touched. And the president has made certain statements with respect to Medicare and Medicaid. And so as we look at this process, we're going to be looking at where can we find savings that are associated with waste, fraud, and abuse in some of these government programs, notwithstanding what the program is. And I think every American expects us to root out. If there are programs that people are qualifying for or using or abusing in a fraudulent way, that ought to be, we ought to be taking care of that. And I think both Republicans and Democrats and anybody else in this country would agree with that sentiment. I think at the end of the day, what is going to happen in reconciliation is we're going to have to figure out how to extend the tax policy. And remember, this is extending existing tax policy. There's some other things the president wants to do in the context of that. all of which we think will be additive to the economy. When the economy is growing, expanding, creating better paying jobs, typically what happens is you get more government revenue, not less. In fact, the rule of thumb generally is about for every 1% increase in GDP, you get an additional $3 trillion in revenue over a 10-year period. So growth is the driving, in my view at least, should be the driving motivation when it comes to tax policy. And when it comes to deficit reduction, is trying to get this country on a more sustainable fiscal path. We are, if you look at the trajectory right now, it's not sustainable. I mean, these deficits, we can't continue this. And so we've got to start making some of the hard decisions. And I think you need to look at every area of the budget, but bear in mind, obviously, that programs like Social Security and Medicare are incredibly important. But if there are, even in those areas, if there is waste, fraud, and abuse, then I think those are areas that we ought to be looking at.
Leader, you raised concerns about the single food checks and the mistakes that were made. So should there be a full Senate investigation into this? And would you support the Senate investigation?
Well, I think that's happening already. I mean, I think the hearing's still going on. The Senate Intelligence Committee today. I mean, they're up here. At least two of the relevant players in that conversation were in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee for a very long period of time in an open setting. And my guess is you'll probably, I suspect the Armed Services Committee may want to have some folks testify and have some of those questions answered as well. I think everybody has acknowledged, including the White House, that mistakes were made. And what we want to do is make sure that something like that doesn't happen again.
Budget reconciliation, Bill Hogan, who worked there for many years as a budget staffer, said if you just look at a handful of tax breaks that are important for small businesses and farmers, bonus depreciation, small business pass-through, the death tax, extending those almost $3.5 trillion. It doesn't even come close to what the president wants, in lower corporate tax rates and ending tips, taxes on tips, on Social Security. He says he just doesn't see how it fits, and he thinks you're going to need an extension, just a straight extension of 2017 Jobs Cuts and Tax Act. Do you disagree with that? And if so, how do you see this getting paid for, fitting a square peg into a round hole?
Well, I mean, again, you'll have to, and this, forgive me for being kind of playing inside Washington here, but what we are doing by extending existing tax policy is just that. You're extending the existing law as it has existed for the last 8 years, since 2017. And so we don't think that ought to be have to be offset or paid for, as you say. If you're doing new things, if you're doing things that are creating new tax policy or new spending, then yes, you ought to be looking at offsetting that. But a lot of the tax policy we're talking about here, including the programs that you mentioned, whether it's bonus depreciation or interest deductibility or the 199A deduction for pass-through businesses, that's an extension of existing tax policy. And so you're simply extending what already exists. And that doesn't change anything. That's basically status quo going forward. There are other things the President does want to do in terms of tax policy, and as the Senate Finance Committee and House Ways and Means Committee, other committees of jurisdiction look at the broader conversation about reconciliation, obviously we're going to be looking at how can we pay for, offset, find savings and reductions in other areas of the budget as we look at potentially new tax policy.